911, what's your emergency?
He's under. Oh God, he's under. The whale hit him. There's blood everywhere.
The pool was silent, except for the faint slap of water against acrylic. The stands, once filled with laughter, now stood empty, scattered with dropped cameras and half-eaten snacks. In the center of the tank, her body was pulled from the depths, limp, her wetsuit shredded, the water around her stained a deep crimson. Moments earlier, hundreds of people had been cheering, their voices rising with joy. Now, the air was thick with shock, the silence almost suffocating. What they had witnessed was not part of the show, not something rehearsed or scripted. It was a rupture in the illusion, a moment when wonder turned to horror. And the last thing they saw was the whale circling slowly beneath the red water, as if nothing had happened. If these moments make you pause, reflect, or question, stay with us, because stories like this must be told and remembered. The applause struck like a wave against the towering walls of Shamu Stadium, rolling through the humid Florida air. The glass of the massive main tank shimmered under the midday sun, each ripple of water catching the light like liquid silver. On the wet stage, Dawn Brancheau stood steady, her black and gray wetsuit clinging with droplets from the earlier run-through, headset snug at her jawline. She smiled, raising her arm in a practiced cue. From the depths, a shadow rose, 22 feet of raw muscle and intelligence. Tilikum broke the surface in a thunderous breach, a geyser of seawater drenching the first rows, children shrieking with joy, parents laughing through their cameras. For the audience, this was magic, a woman and a predator, side by side. To them, Dawn was not just a trainer. She was the calm heart of the show, the bridge between man and beast. Her history spoke of a life bent toward this destiny as a child in Indiana, memorizing whale species, while her peers chased simpler dreams. As a teenager, scrubbing aquarium tanks and listening to dolphins whistle against the walls. As a young woman, graduating with honors in marine biology, eager to make her calling a career. At SeaWorld, she became the face of devotion, the trainer who whispered to orcas as if they were kin. Visitors remembered her name. Colleagues said she had an unspoken language, a gift that defied explanation. And Tilikum, the largest orca in captivity, seemed to answer only her with such certainty. His black and white skin bore scars from past battles. His massive dorsal fin curled under its own weight. Yet, in her presence, he often appeared softer, slower, almost gentle. When she leaned close, pressing her palm against the wet glass, he mirrored the gesture with an eye the size of her fist, watching her, holding her gaze in a way that unsettled some and enchanted others. To the public, this was proof of something sacred, that trust could domesticate power, that affection could tame instinct. The show unfolded in perfect rhythm, synchronized spins, precision splashes, the scripted surfacing that felt like communion. Dawn knelt at the platform's edge, brushing her hand across the sleek curve of his head. Children gasped, believing they were seeing friendship manifest in flesh. Behind the glass, his enormous shadow circled, returning to her every signal as though bound by loyalty. The stadium rang with applause, echoing through the steel rafters. It was a portrait of harmony, a stage-managed miracle. But the illusion of control carried weight. Every motion was measured, every risk balanced against history and instinct. Trainers knew this, though the audience did not. As Dawn wiped saltwater from her face, she looked out across the crowd, rows of smiling faces who saw only perfection. Her own smile stayed fixed, but her breath came slow and deliberate. For all her confidence, for all her faith in this bond, there was no denying that at her side was not a partner, but a predator, one who could end her life in a heartbeat. And still, she believed. Still. She leaned forward when he surfaced again, as if to close the distance between them. The crowd roared once more, unaware that beneath the water, silence held. But in a world built on illusion, trust is the most fragile thing of all. Long before the cheering crowds and choreographed splashes, Tilikum's life began in violence. In 1983, off the frigid coast of Iceland, nets closed around him and his pod. Fishermen slashed the water with poles, corralling the whales into a shrinking circle. His mother's cries cut through the chaos, her sleek body circling desperately. But there was no escape. At less than 2 years old, Tilikum was ripped away, hauled into a holding pen where the sea he knew was reduced to steel bars and stagnant saltwater. The ocean's vast horizon was replaced by a concrete box, his pod's voices replaced by silence. He banged against the gate until his skin tore, then sank into the corner, floating listlessly as if waiting for something that would never return. Decades passed, and his world only grew smaller. At SeaWorld Orlando, he lived in artificial pods, shuffled between tanks designed more for spectacle than for comfort. Orcas in the wild traveled 100 miles a day. Tilikum swam in circles. Trainers noted his displacement behaviors, gnawing on steel gates until blood streaked the water, popping his jaws in bursts of agitation, and hovering motionless at the surface for hours, as if detached from everything around him. To the public, he was the star, the largest orca in captivity, a spectacle of raw power. But to those who knew better, every repetitive circle and every scar etched into his flank was a whisper of suffering, a body carrying the weight of captivity. Few in the stands knew what management worked so hard to conceal. In 1991, during his years at Sealand of the Pacific in Canada, Tilikum had been involved in the death of a trainer. The official account softened the details, calling it an accident. But insiders remembered the violent struggle, the panic, the water churning red. 8 years later, in Orlando, a man who snuck into the park after hours was found dead draped across Tilikum's back. Again, the story was buried in language meant to absolve the institution. Both deaths were filed away, reports marked internal only, never reaching the thousands who clapped in delight each afternoon. Dawn knew of these histories. She had read the files late at night, sitting with her notes, pen tapping against the table. But she believed her connection with him was different. She wasn't reckless, but she trusted in the bond she had built over 10 years. "They don't work for us," she had once told a colleague. "We work together." To her, Tilikum wasn't a monster. He was a wounded giant, one she believed she could reach with patience and respect. Still, the signs were impossible to ignore, weeks before that fateful day. Dawn stood on the edge of the main pool as Tilikum circled below. She gave the signal for a slide out, her arm raised confidently. For a long moment, he did nothing, just floated beneath the surface, his shadow broad and unmoving. Then, suddenly, his massive head snapped upward. With a sharp pop, his jaws slammed shut, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like a gunshot. Water splashed across her wetsuit. She froze, heart leaping into her throat. The moment passed. He dipped beneath the water again, resuming his slow circles as though nothing had happened. Dawn exhaled, lowering her hand, forcing a smile for the nearby staff. She told herself it was a lapse, a fleeting shadow beneath the surface, nothing more. She had seen agitation before. She had calmed him before. Her bond with him was strong enough, she thought, to weather even this. But deep down, the sound of that jaw snap lingered in her chest, like a warning she could not name. The whispers had grown louder, not in the crowd, but in the hallways behind the glass tanks, in the trainer's lounge, over half-finished coffee cups and damp towels. A veteran spoke in low tones. His face was carved with years of sun and chlorine, his eyes heavy with the memory of close calls that never made it to the public eye. "He's slipping," he said, voice raw. "Tilikum's not the same. He's showing displacement, everyday jaw pops, surface floating, ignoring signals. One of these days, he's going to hurt someone again." The room went quiet, the only sound, the whir of the air conditioner, and then the silence was broken by the shuffling of papers and the hollow reassurance of management. Everything was under control. A veterinarian tried too, her report clinical but urgent. She documented agitation, abnormal wear on Tilikum's teeth from gnawing steel, erratic responses during rehearsals. She filed it formally, attaching video clips that showed his massive bulk hanging motionless in the water, eyes unblinking, a whale whose mind was unraveling. The report was received, stamped, and quietly shelved. Safety memos disappeared into the endless bureaucracy, their words muted by a system designed to protect profit before people. The shows sold tickets. The shows filled stadiums. The shows had to go on. Dawn felt the tension in her bones, even as she smiled for visitors and stroked Tillicum's scarred head in rehearsals. He hesitated on cues, sometimes responding seconds late, sometimes not at all. She felt the immense weight of his body brush too close as he circled beneath her, the kind of subtle pressure that trainers could read like a warning. Each time, she steadied herself, convinced that their bond was stronger than the shadows forming in the water. But at night, lying in bed, she replayed the moments she couldn't quite explain, the jaw snap that echoed in her chest, the hollow stare that seemed to pass through her rather than at her. The facility itself betrayed signs of decay. Gates groaned when they shut, their hinges worn by saltwater and neglect. The safety nets meant to separate orcas in emergencies sagged with broken seams. The filtration system hummed unevenly, pumps rattling like a tired heart. Dawn walked past them every day, telling herself the engineers would fix it, that it wasn't her place to question the structure she worked within. But in her gut, it felt like a system fraying thread by thread. Then the message came, late at night. As the glow of her laptop lit her small kitchen, an email arrived from management. Dawn would headline the next Dine with Shamu show, the park's jewel attraction. The subject line was sterile, but its weight pressed into her chest. She read it twice, 3 times, her hands trembling slightly above the keys. She thought of the warnings, the ignored reports, the unease tightening around her like a rope. And then she thought of Tillicum, the bond she believed in, the years she had given to this work. She closed the laptop softly, the room sinking into darkness. Her voice was a whisper meant only for herself, fragile in the silence. "It'll be fine," she said, as though speaking the words could make them true. She repeated it once more, slower this time, her throat dry. And then, against the weight of everything she knew, she agreed. February 24th, 2010. The Florida sun beat down on the stadium's steel beams, turning them into gleaming arcs of silver above the roaring crowd. The amphitheater was full, the air heavy with the smell of salt water and popcorn, the sound of children chattering and cameras clicking, blending into one restless hum. Inside the glass walls of the performance tank, the surface glistened in shifting shades of blue, deceptively calm, like a stage curtain concealing the unknown. Dawn walked onto the wet platform, every step deliberate, her black and gray wetsuit clinging against her frame. She smiled, raising her hand in a signal as she had countless times before. To the audience, that smile was effortless. Only those close enough might have seen the way her chest rose with a heavier breath, or how her eyes flicked toward the water with a trace of tension. She had led this performance hundreds of times, but something in her body understood the difference that her mind still refused to name. Then Tillicum broke the surface. A thunderous breach tore through the water, 22 feet of muscle arcing upward, crashing down with a force that sent a sheet of water over the front rows. Children shrieked, clutching at their soaked shirts, laughter echoing from the stands. It looked like joy, like spectacle, like the illusion of trust made flesh. Yet from where Dawn stood, droplets streaming down her face, she caught what the audience did not, the hesitation. He was a beat late, the rise less fluid, his tail slap sharper, creating reverberations that carried like muffled warnings through the water. Dawn adjusted instantly, masking the misstep with practiced grace. She coaxed him with a calm gesture, her hand low, her voice steady, as if smoothing the tension in the air itself. To the crowd, nothing seemed amiss. To her, each correction felt like pulling at a rope already frayed. Her heart knocked against her ribs, but her face never betrayed it. The show moved forward, the routines unfolding like clockwork, but Dawn felt every slip beneath the surface. A tail flick too aggressive, a delayed response to a hand signal, a pause at the edge of the platform, his dark eye fixing on her longer than usual, as though weighing something unsaid. She held her composure, even as her throat grew dry, even as the awareness of his immensity pressed against her like the shadow of a storm. The amphitheater vibrated with applause as the act neared its finale. This was the moment audiences waited for, the climax of spectacle, the close contact maneuver, the most dangerous sequence in the routine. Dawn knew it by heart. She had rehearsed it thousands of times, trusted it like breathing. Still, as she wiped salt from her lashes, a flicker of unease brushed against her thoughts. She steadied her breath, told herself it was fine. She would finish strong. She stepped toward the edge, the water lapping against the platform. Tilikum circled below, the faint gleam of his scarred body gliding just beneath the surface. She crouched slightly, extended her arm, signaling him into position. The crowd hushed, anticipation pulling the air taut. Every eye was fixed on her, on him, on the bond they believed was unbreakable. Dawn turned her back to him, muscles tensed, preparing for the final launch. Her body leaned into the pose, rehearsed 1,000 times, perfected through years of trust. And in that single moment of vulnerability, it happened. The strike came like a lightning bolt, too fast to comprehend. One moment, Dawn was poised at the platform's edge, signaling with calm precision. The next, the water erupted. A blur of black and white surged upward, jaws wide, and clamped down on her arm with bone-crushing force. The sound was muffled under the splash, but she felt it reverberate through her body, a tearing, grinding pain that stole the air from her lungs. Gasps rippled through the amphitheater, but half the audience clapped nervously, still believing it was part of the show. Children squealed, their laughter fading into confusion. Parents froze, phones raised mid-photo, trying to decide whether what they saw was performance or nightmare. Under the surface, all illusion collapsed. Dawn's world became a storm of bubbles and darkness. The force of Tilikum's pull yanked her into the depths, her body twisting helplessly in his grip. Her lungs screamed as she fought for air, her free hand clawing at the water, striking at his enormous flank with a desperation born of instinct. His jaws did not loosen. He thrashed with terrifying purpose, his bulk creating whirlpools that spun her like a rag doll, smashing her against the tank's acrylic walls. Each impact sent shockwaves through her chest. The water roared in her ears, her vision narrowing into a suffocating blur. Above, chaos erupted. Trainers scrambled to deploy emergency measures, their voices hoarse with commands that vanished into the cavernous air. Nets were flung into the water, underwater recall tones blared through hidden speakers, but nothing penetrated the storm of Tilikum's frenzy. One trainer screamed her name, reaching desperately toward the surface as though sheer will could pull her back. Onlookers realized the truth, horror breaking through denial. Screams cascaded through the stands, colliding with the deep, hollow thuds of the orca's massive tail slamming the water. Parents clutched children to their chests, shielding their eyes, while others stood frozen, unable to look away. Seconds stretched into eternity. Dawn surfaced briefly, her face pale, mouth open in a silent cry before being dragged under once more. The water churned violently, then shifted in color, frothy white, collapsing into crimson. A dark plume spread across the pool, swirling with every thrash of the whale. Gasps turned into wails. A shoe broke free, floating quietly to the surface, bobbing amid the chaos like a fragile, haunting relic. Inside the tank, the assault continued with methodical brutality. Tilikum gripped tighter, dragging her to the bottom, then surging upward in violent bursts. He shook her with primal force, the infamous killing shake known to hunters in the wild. Each movement was devastating, each second cutting deeper into her body and soul. Dawn fought with every ounce of strength left in her, but the ocean inside her chest was empty. Her lungs burned, her vision dimmed, the bond she had believed in nurtured with patience, love, and trust was shattered in the silence of the water. When Tilikum finally surfaced again, Dawn was in his grasp, limp against his massive frame. Blood streaked his mouth, his dark eye glinting as he circled the tank slowly, presenting her to the stadium. A collective scream tore through the amphitheater, a sound raw with disbelief and terror. Trainers rushed forward, long poles and ropes stretching across the water, desperate hands reaching as if they could undo what had already been sealed. With sudden stillness, he released her. Her body floated briefly before staff hauled her onto the platform, wetsuit torn, hair clinging to her pale face. They pressed against her chest, began compressions, their hands frantic, their voices breaking. But the silence that swept through the stadium was heavier than any sound. Children wept openly, their cries cutting through the stunned hush. Parents led their families away in a daze, stepping over spilled drinks and dropped cameras. Trainers knelt in shock, their hands covered in water and blood, their faces pale as stone. The pool, once a stage of spectacle, now reflected nothing but a red haze drifting slowly across the surface. It had taken minutes, only minutes. And yet, in that short span of time, the illusion of harmony collapsed forever. By the time the sun dropped behind Orlando's horizon, the park was sealed in silence. Police cars lined the entrance, their red and blue lights flashing against the SeaWorld sign that only hours earlier welcomed laughing families. Security guards ushered stragglers out through side gates, faces pale, clothes damp, eyes hollow from what they had seen. Inside, Shamu Stadium was roped off with yellow tape, the once bustling amphitheater, now an empty shell echoing with the memory of screams. Tilikum circled in the tank, his massive body gliding through water, stained by traces of what could never be undone. That evening, SeaWorld released a statement to the press. The words were carefully chosen, polished until they gleamed with corporate detachment. We are deeply saddened by the loss of one of our most experienced trainers. Our thoughts are with her family and loved ones. SeaWorld remains committed to the highest standards of safety. There was no mention of the ignored reports, no acknowledgement of the animal's past, only the steady drumbeat of denial. To the company, the show was not over. It could never end. But outside those gates, the truth was already spilling into the streets. By morning, OSHA investigators arrived, clipboards in hand, combing through safety audits, training logs, and years of incident reports that had been quietly buried in cabinets and encrypted drives. They found patterns, behaviors documented but dismissed, warnings filed but never acted on, safety recommendations stamped and shelved. The truth was, clear management had known Tilikum was dangerous, unpredictable, and already tied to death. Yet he had been kept in rotation, pushed to perform for packed crowds because he filled seats. His value was measured in ticket sales, not the risk carried in his shadow. Leaked documents made their way into the press within days. Headlines exploded, ignored warnings. Deadly pattern. Profits before safety. Outside the gates of SeaWorld Orlando, candles flickered against the night as protesters gathered. They carried banners with Dawn's name painted in red, alongside stark words, "Justice for Dawn," "Free Tilikum," "Shut down SeaWorld." Voices rose in chants that echoed through the humid air, while inside the park, the only sound was the hollow groan of filtration pumps cycling water through the tank where the giant whales circled endlessly. And then, the revelation that shifted everything. From Dawn's family came pages of her journal, written in neat, sloping handwriting. In one entry, she had written, "It's not his fault. He's a prisoner. The system failed us both." Those words stripped away the last veil of illusion. The story was no longer predator versus victim. It was two lives, one human, one animal, both caught in the same cage, built by profit and pride. Tilikum was not a monster. He was evidence. And Dawn, even in death, became his final advocate. In the weeks that followed, SeaWorld suspended all in-water performances. Trainers were banned from swimming with orcas, protocols rewritten from the ground up. But to many, it was too little, too late. Dawn was gone. Her life measured against policies that should have changed long before. Her story became a rallying cry, spreading beyond Orlando to ripple through the entire marine park industry. Lawmakers pushed for reforms, petitions gained millions of signatures, and for the first time, the public began to ask the questions the parks had worked so hard to suppress. Years later, the tank still stands, but it is no longer just a stage. It is a mirror, reflecting back the uneasy truth. Behind every synchronized jump and splash was a system built on fragile trust and silenced warnings. Behind every cheer was a creature pacing circles in a prison too small to contain its mind. And behind every smile was a trainer who believed love was enough to keep danger at bay. Dawn's legacy endures in every protest sign, every child who learns the truth, every orca spared another decade behind glass. But her loss lingers too, a wound carved deep into the conscience of a culture that once called captivity entertainment. So the question remains, hanging heavy over the empty stands and silent pools. Can we truly claim to love these creatures if we cage them for our amusement, or is every splash against the glass, every dark eye staring back at us, nothing more than a plea for freedom we refuse to hear? The stadium lights have long been turned off, yet the glass walls still glimmer faintly under the moon. A single shoe rests near the edge of the platform, waterlogged and forgotten, as if waiting for someone who will never return. Inside the tank, the surface is smooth now, betraying nothing of the violence it once concealed. The silence feels heavy, a silence born not of peace, but of absence. What was once a stage of wonder is now a cage of questions, the boundary between control and catastrophe etched too thin to hold. The great whale circles slowly in the dark, unseen, carrying both the weight of blame and the burden of captivity. For those who watched, the memory will not fade. It lingers in the stillness, in the hollow echo where applause once lived, and it leaves one question hanging in the air: was the price of our wonder ever worth their freedom?